This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Welcome back to the Morning Run. Julian here, and together with Wong, Shou, Ning here with you as well. And we're running a poll today. Do you think home buyers in Malaysia are sufficiently protected under the law? Head on to our Twitter account at BFM Radio to give us your vote. You have 1 hour left, and so far we have already got slightly more than 100 votes, and 63%, almost two-thirds, think that they are not sufficiently protected under existing laws. So home buyers are, they think that's shortchanged under existing laws. So Malaysia is attempting to currently bridge the housing glut. Old problems remain in the property sector. In a list back in September, the Housing and Local Government Ministry has identified a total of 200 abandoned projects.
Now, what's shocking is some of them are remnants from the mid-80s recession and also the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Now, the government has since indicated that out of the 200, there are 66 projects in the recovery planning stage and another 11 projects in the midst of being revived.
And for a macro view on why the abandoned projects continue to linger for so long, we speak to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, or IDEAS. Good morning, Dr. Carmelo. Thanks for joining us. Now, abandoned housing projects aren't a new thing. Why is this still an issue today? Why has the market failed to correct this?
Abandoned projects, in this case regarding housing, but could be about something else related with a different kind of boom, are the end of a cycle. So are the physical manifestation that the economic sentiment at a certain point during the boom went overexcited. So after a few investors started a wave of new investments, in this case in the housing market, they called somehow for a second wave of investors, imitators and speculators that were attracted by the positive dynamic of the boom. But however, these kind of second comers, they bring the system, the boom, beyond its natural expansion. And this happens in whatever boom. So investment were initiated on the wave of some enthusiasm, but this enthusiasm is overcome by inflation, by lack of demand, and by realizing that the boom has been brought too far. And somehow this is not only the result of misled or wrong investment decision, but somehow the boom was also supported by easier credit, and this helped the boom to prolong beyond its natural size.
So how can developers be incentivized to revitalize or actually turn these abandoned housing projects into profit opportunities then?
We should ask, should developers be incentivized to do so, in the sense that it is clear that these investments were in a direction where there is no demand. So to help this kind of investment means to help mistakes to get prolonged, to get repeated. So I would be against revitalizing these projects unless they can turn into something else. And even if, I have to be honest, even the demand for affordable housing is not that strong in this moment. We have the latest numbers. But somehow maybe they can be directed in that directions with fiscal incentives, in example.
And how about the government's role in smoothing out the boom and bust cycle? Should the government step into the housing market?
It is important for the government to design the right institutional framework, even if I believe that the room for action is not that big. But most probably the important policy that could be adopted is to control the credit system, to have stricter rules, so that whenever there is a boom and profit expectations, the credit system doesn't follow the wave of the boom, doesn't add fire on the fire, but becomes like, in a way, an arging toward this overexpansion.
And that was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at IDEAS, talking to us about the long-standing issue of overhang in the property sector.
Yeah, there's a surprisingly huge number of abandoned projects in Malaysia. I cannot figure out why this continues to be a problem. Is it the fact that our laws are so lackadaisical that developers can just start projects and then when it fails, walk away from it without any repercussion to these, honestly, poor home buyers, right? Because they're stuck with a property they can't even live in.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Carmelo, though, because he doesn't agree with continuing to fund all these abandoned projects because that would be prolonging the mistakes. I think this is one clear case where you should let free markets take over. If you have made a bad decision, then as a developer, you would have to suffer for it. But also as a home buyer, you are suffering for it as well. And in that sense, our next guest is General Datuk Goh Seng Toh, Vice President of the National Home Buyers Association, and we are tapping into his experience from the homeowner's perspective. Good morning, General Datuk. Thanks for joining us. What can be done to protect home buyers from having to face the double whammy of loan repayments and yet no delivery of homes?
Hi, good morning. Yes, this is one of my favorite subjects. I'm the Vice President of the National House Buyers Association, and one of the reasons, in fact, the main reason why I joined the NGO is that we see such a gross injustice suffered by the Malaysian home buyers, house buyers at large. And it is one of the most devastating experience a person can get into, because can you imagine rounding up all your savings and put the money to pay for the down payment of a house, your dream house, and then having to continue to service the progressive payment, which is your housing loan that is being progressively released.
General, what do you think can be done to protect home buyers?
The main thing, a developer's business, a housing project, is a business venture. It can be successful in most cases, and also it can end up in failures. But in any other business, when the businessman fails, the end buyers, the customers, are not affected. But in the housing industry, when the developer is not successful, and there are roughly about 2% of projects that fail.
What can be done, Dato? If you were in power and you could implement laws, what can be done?
Oh, the main thing, and that is my favorite subject as well, is to progress on to the build then sell 1090 system.
Right, that's interesting. Build then sell, which means that it's very different from the existing system where it's a progressive payments. Do you think that this build then sell will pose significant problems as well, because developers would need to seek funding for that, and the supply end up to be very small at the end of it?
Yes, this subject has been debated at the country's highest level.
Do you think there is a problem with build and sell because you're actually limiting supply of housing?
No, we don't reckon so, and a lot of other players in the industry also doesn't reckon so. And in fact, it would be a very safe mode, not only for house buyers, but for everybody, especially the banks, because they are now operating in a very safe regime, unlike the present system where there's no guarantee that their collateral will materialize. When a project fails, the collateral is shattered and their exposure is very, very severe. This is the bank. But of course, the worst victims are the house buyers.
But General, can I just ask, what about the current housing laws? Do they provide enough protection for home buyers who are caught in this predicament?
Not in terms of project abandonment, and also not in terms of quality of houses. Because when you make progressive payment, you are actually getting yourself more and more financially incurred. And at the end of the day, when you're ready to take over the house, you have already paid up about 95%, and you are forced to take over whatever quality houses.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And that was General Datuk Goh Seng Toh, Vice President of the National House Buyers Association. Shou, I think that there is usually a problem with build and sell. I think it's a good a way to sell houses because it's more secure for home buyers. But the main problem is that it wouldn't be incentivizing for developers. They would not want to readily get into the housing business because they would have to have a lot of funding before they build a house.
That's true, Julian, but it will also mean maybe they will be more careful when they embark on a project because they will have to bear the financial risk if the project doesn't take off.
And so what you would have is a situation where you end up with less supply, right? I agree that it protects home buyers a lot more and perhaps it will give higher margins to the developers, but then they would still have got to have that bit of very chunky funding.
Actually, for build and sell, if you look at some of the models overseas in Australia and UK, the margins are actually thinner for the developer because you need to come up with the cash flow versus the progressive payment system in Malaysia. So definitely our developers here have a higher margin. But on the other hand, on the flip side, hey, maybe you might have better quality developers because only the fittest will survive.
So the question is really to think about demand and supply, right? Rather, we want to have less supply, which may not be a bad idea in this current situation. Maybe not to overbuild the houses over here. All right, we are coming up to the 8 a.m. news, and after that, the Breakfast Grill, where Lin Mark would talk to Datuk Ngay, CEO of Ferruni Ceramiche, which is a tile company. Stay tuned for that after the news. BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.